The morning of the auction, there were 19 oxen nobody wanted. They stood in the far pen at the county yard, back where the dust hung thickest and the light came in low and yellow through the boards. 19 big framed draft animals gone down to skeleton and hide. You could count the ribs on any one of them from the road, count them the way a man counts fence pickets, one and one and one. Their hip bones stood up like tent stakes under skin that had lost the will to shine. Their coats were dull and staring, the hair gone the wrong direction in patches, and their hooves had grown long and splayed and unminded, curling up at the toes so the poor beasts rocked back on their heels when they moved, which was seldom and slow. One of them, a heavy red one near the gate, carried a weeping eye, a slow, wet track down the bone of its face that it had long since quit trying to shake off. When one of them breathed deep, you could hear it, a wet rattle down in the chest like wind in a dry drainpipe, the sound of an animal spending more to stand than it was taking in. They did not crowd the rail the way stock crowds a rail, hoping to be fed. They stood where they stood, with their heads down and their eyes gone flat and patient, waiting on nothing, the way beasts wait when the waiting has stopped meaning anything. They were too gaunt for beef. Every yard man there could see it. There was nothing on them a butcher would pay to hang. And they were too slow and too far gone to bring anything as work stock, because who would carry the feed bill to bring 19 dying oxen back to a plow when a plow of iron sat gassed and waiting 2 lots down? The narrator will tell you the joke was already old before the sun cleared the grandstand. It ran along the rail like a grass fire, low and easy, that this lot would cost a man more to haul home than it would ever bring him, that you'd want to bid on them only if you were partial to the smell of a rendering truck. Merrill Dowd had the gavel that morning, and Merrill ran them through fast and bored, the way a man reads a list of names he does not expect anyone to answer to. He did not sing them up the way he sang up a good horse. He said the number, and he said it plain, and he waited on the quiet he already knew was coming, and the quiet came. Along the top rail the men leaned and laughed, hats pushed back, boots hooked on the low board, and the laughing was not cruel exactly, it was only certain. The laughter of men who have never once in their lives been wrong about the price of a thing, and loudest among them, and most prosperous, and most sure, stood Royce Tarver. Royce had come for the tractor. Everybody knew it. 2 lots down and under a tarp sat a brand-new machine, green and gold and clean as a church, and Royce meant to have it. And while he waited he held court at the rail the way a big man holds court, telling the whole yard what any fool with sense already knew. "Iron," he said. "You buy iron. You buy the thing that starts when you turn it and stops when you're done, and don't eat a bushel a day for the privilege of dying on you. A tractor doesn't get old on you, and it doesn't get sick on you, and it doesn't stand in a pen at the county yard looking like a stack of firewood somebody forgot to burn." He waved a thick hand at the far pen without quite looking at it, the way a man waves off a smell. 19 head of walking funerals, he called them, and the rail laughed. And Royce grinned at the laugh the way a man grins at money in his own hand. He was not a bad man, the narrator will tell you, only a sure one, and the two are not always easy to tell apart from the top rail on a bright morning. Now here I want you to notice something, because it came through the dust plainly, and without any hurry at all, and half the yard never marked it. Odessa Quill came down the alley between the pens on foot, unhurried, in a plain coat gone soft at the cuffs, and she did not look at Royce Tarver, and she did not look at the tarped machine. The narrator flags for you now, as a fact offered for consideration, the stub of pencil and the green cloth notebook riding in her breast pocket, a habit. that notebook. A thing she had come home carrying. Though this is not yet the hour to tell you why she came home, or what she had come home from. She stopped at the far pen. She put a boot on the low board, and she went over the rail into the dust with the animals, which no buyer does, because a buyer stands outside and lets the beast be walked to him. She did not stand outside. She went in among them, in among the big slow shapes and the smell of them, ox sweat and hot dust and the Swedish rot of hooves too long untrimmed, and the 19 shifted and let her come. Too tired to shy, she crouched down beside the heaviest of them, the great slow one at the center of the lot, the one built like a barn door, even starved, and she laid a flat open hand on the point of his shoulder where the bone stood up under the dull coat, and she looked for a long time without saying anything. That is the whole of it, and it is the hinge the whole story swings on, so the narrator will not dress it up. She crouched in the dirt with her hand on a dying animal, and she looked, and she said nothing, and she did not make a large production out of it. She was weighing them. She was weighing the 19 of them against the green and gold machine under the tarp, because it was the same money, the exact same money, counted to the dollar. That would buy the one or the other, and only her hand knew yet which way it would go. She ran the flat of that hand down the great slow shoulder and along the barrel of ribs, slow, reading the animal the way you read a page in poor light. And whatever she was reading there, she read all the way to the end of it before she moved. The dust turned in the low light between the boards. Somewhere off behind her Merrill Dowd's voice went on flat over some other lot, and she did not hear it, or heard it the way you hear water. The men at the rail waited on her to climb back out and shake her head the way a sensible person shakes it. She stood up. She brushed the dust off her knee once, and when Merrill Dowd said the number, low and bored and already moving past it, she bid the whole lot. Merrill's chin came up. He said it back to her to be sure, and she nodded once, and there was no other bid, there was never going to be another bid, and the gavel came down soft, almost apologetic, the way you set a thing down that you are surprised to be holding. She paid for them cheap, because dying is cheap, and she paid in cash, counted out of a worn envelope in worn bills, laid into Merrill's hand one soft bill at a time, while the yard leaned in to watch a young woman count money onto the head of 19 animals the trade had already buried. The yard went quiet while she counted. And then, when the last bill was down, and it was real, and could not be undone, the yard went loud. It came up off the rail in a wave. The laughter, the slapped knee and the turned head, and the elbow in the neighbor's ribs, and Royce Tarver said it for all of them, said it out loud and easy the way you offer a joke to a crowd you already own. She'd paid good money, he said, for 19 head of dog food. She'd stood there in front of God and the county and chosen a pen of dying beef over a brand-new tractor. He shook his head, and he grinned, and he pitched it to the back of the crowd so the back of the crowd could have it too. She'll be plowing with buzzards by spring, he said. And the rail roared, and it was a good line, and it landed hard, and it landed public, and Odessa Quill folded the empty envelope once and put it away in the pocket with the green notebook, and did not answer him, did not so much as turn her head, because there was nothing yet in her to answer with, only the counting she had already done, kneeling with her hand on the bone. He had meant it as a prediction of failure. It would turn out to be a prediction of something else entirely. If this is the kind of story you stay for, do me a small favor. Tap the like button and, in the comments, tell me the town or city you're watching from, because I read every single one. Now, let's begin. She had not come home because she had a plan. The narrator will tell you that plainly, because it is the truest thing to be said about her, and because everything that came after leaned back on it like a fence leans on a good corner post. She had come home because her grandfather had died in the spring, and her grandmother was alone, and those two facts sat in a room together and needed a third thing in the room with them. And the third thing was her. Amos Quill had gone in April, quiet, in the chair by the window, and they buried him on a day when the ground was still cold enough to argue with the shovel. He left behind 80 acres of tired hill and a widow named Verna, small and wiry and 80-some, who could still swing a bucket but could not carry the whole of a farm on a back that had already carried it 40 years. The Quill place had gone the way such places go when the man who knew it wears out. Dry ochre pasture burned pale at the crown of every rise, a leaning gray barn that had given up being square, whitewash peeling off the house in long curls like birch bark, and out at the trough a hand-cut stone basin, squared by somebody's grandfather's grandfather, gone bone dry and full of blown dust. In the lane sat the old Ford. A 70s pickup the color rust makes when it has finished its work, sunk to the rims and composing its own obituary, one flake at a time. Odessa's own life in town had come apart the way a rope comes apart, not all at once, but strand by strand, until one day there was nothing left to hold. A job gone. A rented life that had never once put down a root into anything. So when Verna needed hands, that was reason enough, and reason enough was, the narrator would tell you, the only kind of reason that ever moves a person the whole distance. Now everyone agreed on the cure. The loan office in town agreed, and the neighbors agreed, and the man at the feed counter agreed, and they were all kind about it. And they were all saying the same one thing. The only way to make the worn-out bottom field pay again was to borrow against the place and buy a tractor. Put a lien on the 80 acres, they said, and let the iron earn it back. And here I want you to notice something, because it is the spine the whole story stands on. Odessa would not do it. She would not put the farm in debt. She had watched, in town, what debt does to people who love a thing, how it moves in quiet as a boarder and then, by and by, owns the house, and she had decided, in some place below deciding, that whatever else failed, the ground under Verna's feet would not be owed to anybody. That was the line. She meant to hold it. Verna sat at the plain kitchen table with a bowl in her lap, shelling peas, her thumb splitting the pods with a small, clean sound, and she said about 1/10 of what she was thinking, which was her lifelong practice and, the narrator suspects, the reason she had lasted. Odessa told her, careful, that she would not borrow for the tractor. Verna shelled another pod. She did not argue, and she did not agree. She got up instead, slow, and went to the front room and came back and set a book on the table between them, not gently and not hard, but the way you set down a fact offered for consideration. It was Amos's ledger, clothbound, swollen at the spine with damp seasons, the corners gone soft as cloth. Odessa opened it and found the whole of a man laid down in pencil, 40 years of weather noted at the top of every page, rain measured in the honest inch, herd tallies, prices, the day the pond froze and the day it broke, and folded in among it all the hand-drawn maps of the place, every field and gate and low spot rendered in a draftsman's patient hand. She turned to the bottom field, and there it was, the field mapped careful, and down in the low southwest corner a small square marked off, no bigger than a thumbnail, ruled twice around, and beside it, in Amos's hand, one line, and the line alone on that whole page underlined in pencil, pressed hard enough to shine, the hill remembers where the spring ran. Let the slow beasts find it, a tractor only skates the top. Odessa read it once, and read it twice, and read it a third time with her finger under the words like a child learning. She asked her grandmother what it meant. Verna looked at the window a moment, at the dry light on the dry hill, and she answered the way the old ones answer, flat, a near riddle laid down whole. The ground remembers where it ran, she said. And that was all she said, and it was enough, because it opened the door on a thing the family had half forgotten. There had been a spring once, 2 generations back, that fed the bottom field cold and clear the year round, and made it the best 40 acres in the county, grass to your knee when the rest of the country stood in dust. And then had come a dry decade, one of those spells that empties the sky for years, and the spring had failed, or seemed to. And somebody had capped the seep to keep the stock out of the mud and moved the working of the land uphill, and the place where the water ran had been lost under sod and lost under memory until it was only a square on an old map and a line no one had underlined but the dead man. Amos had always said it, Verna told her. In the 10 words she spent on it, the old field wanted weight, and it wanted patience. It wanted beasts that leaned into the ground and opened it deep and slow, not iron that ran across the top of it fast and called that farming. Weight and patience, not speed. And Odessa sat very still at that table, and the narrator would have you know that this is the moment the 19 head of dog food stopped being a fool's mercy and became a plan older than she was. 19 slow-heavy draft oxen, bought cheap and starving, to be brought back and yoked and set to break the bottom field the deep old way, exactly to the letter, as the man in the ground had written it down. She took out her own notebook then, the green cloth one with the stub pencil, the habit she had come home wearing, and she copied the underlined line into it word for word, and then, and do me the kindness of marking this, she underlined it herself, her own pencil over her own hand, pressing hard the way he had. She had begun her own record. 2 books now, and the same line running under both. That evening, when the heat let go, and the light went long and gold and lay down flat across the pale hill, she walked out to the dry stone trough and stood beside it with her hands on the warm, rough stone that some Quill had cut by hand before the tractor was ever thought of. The basin held nothing but dust and one dead leaf. She stood there a long while as the shadows went that cool denim blue that gathers in the low places at the end of a dry day, the green notebook square in her breast pocket against her heart, and she did not say anything, because there was nothing yet to say to a dry trough that would not sound like a promise, and she was not a woman to make a large production out of a promise. But she had read the line, and she had underlined it, and she had bought the beasts to keep it. She was resolved. The county did not know it yet, and would not know it for a long season of laughter still to come, but the counting had already been done, kneeling with her hand on the bone, and now the reason for it lay open on a kitchen table in a dead man's patient hand. And the water was still down there, under all of it, waiting on weight, waiting on patience, waiting on the slow beasts to come and find it. And so the finding began, though it did not look like finding. It looked like buckets. It looked that first long summer like a young woman crossing a dry lot in the gray before dawn with 2 buckets of clean water, because the stone trough was still dry and would stay dry until the ground gave it back, and crossing it again and again, until the count was met and the water stood clear in the low tubs, and the 19 came to it slow and suspicious the way starved things come to anything, half expecting it to be taken away. The narrator will tell you there is no drama in rehabilitation, and that is precisely why the county missed it. Nobody drives out to watch a hoof get trimmed. She sat on an overturned bucket, with the heaviest of the beasts standing over her, its breath still carrying that wet rattle from the sail pen, and she lifted the near forefoot into her lap and pared away the long splayed overgrowth a little at a time. The way Harlan would later tell her was the only way, a little at a time, because a foot gone wrong over years does not come right in a day, and a beast that has learned to distrust its own feet must be taught to stand square again before it can be taught anything else. She wormed them. She fed them small and often, good hay in the morning and grain soaked soft, so the old teeth and the shrunk bellies could take it, and she did not overfeed them, which is the mistake that pity makes and kindness does not. Because a starved gut flooded all at once is a killed animal, and she had read that too, in the ledger, in the dead man's hand, on a page about a hard winter 40 years gone. Feed the poor ones like you are apologizing, small and steady, was how he had put it. Salt, shade under the leaning gray barn in the white heat of the afternoons. Time, above all the thing the loan office could not lend and the tractor could not turn, which was time, patient and unhurried and costing nothing but the willingness to spend it. And here I want you to notice something. Because it is the whole of her and the whole of the story, she kept the count in the green notebook, 19 every dusk, and beside each number a word or two on the coat. The eye, the manner of the breath, so that the getting better could be seen on paper before it could be seen on the bone. She was building a record. She did not yet know for whom. It was into this, in the 3rd or 4th week, that Harlan Vesey came up the lane. He had been driving past for some days, slowing his old flatbed at the mouth of the drive and looking and going on. And the narrator will be honest with you that he did not come out of pity, for pity was a thing Harlan Vesey had worn out of himself, decades back on ground harder than this. He came because word had gone around, the way word does, that some girl had paid cash money for a pen of dying oxen when she might have had iron, and Harlan had known Amos Quill, and Harlan had driven oxen himself when there was scarcely another man left in 3 counties who could. And he wanted, he said afterward, only to come and see the fool. He came up the lane on foot and stood at the rail and said nothing for a long while, which she would learn was his way, and he watched her working down a hind foot with the big lead beast, leaning its whole tired weight into her shoulder and trusting her, and something moved in his face that was not pity and was not scorn. It was recognition, plain and quiet, a craftsman recognizing the work of another craftsman. She showed him the ledger because she did not know what else to offer a man like that, and he turned the pages with 2 fingers to the yoke sketches, the bows and the beams drawn out in Amos's careful pencil with the measurements beside them, and he looked a long time, and he said, "Your grandfather knew his ground." Then he looked over the rail at the heaviest ox, the slow one, the one that had stood over her in the dawn, and he said, "This is not a bad beast." That was all. From a man like Harlan Vesey it was a sermon. He came back the next day, and the day after, and he taught her without condescension and without softness, which are 2 different mercies, and she was grateful for both. He taught her to match the pairs, this one's steady heart to that one's willing shoulder, the way you build a team from the inside out. He taught her to hew and fit the wooden yokes and set the bows so they rode the neck without galling, because a galled ox is a ruined ox, and the fault is always the driver's. He put the goad in her hand and taught her it was for pointing and not for punishing. And he taught her the voice, the old lost grammar of it, G for the offside and haw for the near, and the low steady come up that starts a green team leaning into the yoke before they have quite decided to, and how to read a tired team so you rest them before they quit rather than after, because a team that learns it can quit is a team half spoiled. She wrote all of it down. Of course she wrote it down. The boy came without being sent for. Silas Boone, 16 and grave and quiet as a fence post, showed up one morning to help move animals and simply stayed, and the narrator will tell you the county had a great deal to say about the girl and said almost nothing about the boy, which was its way of missing what mattered. Because the boy had the hands. There is no teaching it, and there is no faking it. A beast knows in the first minute whether the hands on it are afraid or cruel or nothing, or whether they are the other thing. And the big animals went quiet under Silas Boone, the way water goes flat at dusk. He worked harder than anyone, and said less than anyone, and Harlan watched him one afternoon and gave the smallest nod a man can give. She did not name them. She held that line. She almost held that line. For a name is a door, and once a thing has a name it can be grieved, and she had meant to keep this a business of numbers, 19 head, a ledger, and not a household. But there was the heaviest one, the slowest, the one with the heaviest foot and the patientest eye, the very beast the dead man's page had called the slow beast that would find the water. And one evening, with the notebook open on her knee, she wrote a single word beside his number, and the word was ballast. Because he was the weight that steadied the whole team, and because a thing that carries the load ought at least to be called by its work. The first name in a book she had meant to keep only numbers in. She underlined it once. She did not make a large production out of it. At the feed store, the county had reached its verdict, which was that she was a soft-headed girl, playing at farmer with a dead man's foolishness for a rule-book. And Royce Tarver held the floor there as he held it everywhere, prosperous and loud and sure, and he offered it to the men at the counter as a fact offered for consideration, not unkindly even. The way you would note that a green apple will surely fall, she would fail by Christmas, he said. She would be selling that whole yoked lot for hide before the ground froze hard, and it was a pity iron was cheaper in the end than sentiment. The men nodded. They generally did, but by the far end of that summer a thing had begun that the feed store could not see, because the feed store does not drive out to look. The 19 were filling out. The hip bones had gone back under flesh, the ribs no longer counted from the road, the dull staring coats had come slick and dark, and the weeping eye had cleared. And more than filled out, trained, the lead pair, Ballast and his match, stepped clean and square to her voice across the dry lot, gee and haw and come up, the yoke riding easy, the chain singing taut, and a neighbor who had come to buy a heifer stood at the rail and watched them turn at the fence and go quiet, and had nothing to say, which for that neighbor was a great deal. Golden hour lay long and heavy over the lot, and the dust hung gold in it, and the big beasts leaned into their work like they had been made for it, which they had. And at the edges of all this, if you were the kind to notice, the season had begun to turn. The sky had a hard white look to it that the old men did not like. The grass in the high pasture cured off early and pale. At the feed store, between the jokes, the talk had started to bend toward wells, whose was holding and whose was dropping. And out on the county road in the still afternoons, The dust stood up behind a wagon, and did not settle, but hung there, waiting, the way dust does when the rain is a long time coming and means to be longer. The narrator saw it. The narrator will not pretend otherwise. But Odessa Quill had her buckets and her ledger and 19 head coming back from the dead, and one of them, now, with a name. The rain that was a long time coming did not come at all. What came instead was the drought, and it came the way real trouble comes to farm country, not all at once, but by degrees, so that no single morning could be pointed to as the morning it began. The hard white sky the old men had not liked settled in and stayed, and had no give in it. The high pasture that had cured off pale burned on down to ochre, and then to the color of an old bone left in the sun. The creeks that had run thin ran thinner, and then in the low places did not run at all, but stood in green pools going to scum, and then the pools went too. The narrator will tell you that a drought is a slow thing to watch and a fast thing to remember, and that the whole county learned that summer what the ledger had known for 40 years, which was that a man does not own water the way he thinks he does. The wells went one at a time, and always at night, it seemed, a pump losing its prime in the dark, and a family coming down to a dry tap at breakfast, and the word of it moving up the county road faster than any wagon. The tractored fields, the good flat quick-plowed fields that everyone had borrowed against and been proud of, those blew first. The topsoil that iron had skated across for years lifted off them in the afternoon wind, and stood up brown against that white sky, and traveled, and a man could stand at his fence and watch his ground leave him going east, and there was not one thing he could do about it. And some of them stood there and watched it anyway, because a man will watch the thing he cannot stop. Royce Tarver's big irrigated place held longest, the way money holds longest. But even money has a bottom to it, and by the deep of that summer Royce Tarver was hauling water, tank wagons going out to his stock in the heat and coming back empty to fill again. An expensive, slow bleeding that everyone at the feed store could see, and nobody said one word about to his face. They were all of them skating the top of a dying land, exactly, precisely, to the letter, the way the dead man had written it down. And here I want you to notice something, because it is the whole of the thing. While the county hauled water across the top of the ground, Odessa Quill went down into it. She yoked her recovered oxen on a morning already gone hot by 7, Ballast in the near lead where the Ledger's slow beast belonged, and his match beside him, the pairs behind them matched by weight and temper the way Harlan Vesey had taught her, the bows fitted. The chain hooked to the old breaking plow she had sharpened herself, and she took the team down the lane and through the gap and into the long-abandoned bottom field that no one had turned in 2 generations. She had the map. She had copied the lines of it into her green notebook, but she carried Amos's ledger too, wrapped in oilcloth against the dust, and she worked strictly by his hand. The small square marked in soft pencil out toward the low middle of the field, where the ground lay a shade different if you knew to look, and she knew now to look. The loud advice came the way loud advice comes. A neighbor slowed his wagon at the road and told her plainly she was working good animals to death over dead ground, and she ought to sell the lot while they had flesh on them and salvage what she could. She did not make a large production out of answering him. She said, "This is the field," and she said it flat, and she turned the team, and the neighbor drove on with the story he would tell at the store. Render it slow now, because it was slow, and because the slowness was the point of it, and always had been. The plowing went across several days, and the narrator would not compress them for you if he could, because Odessa did not get to compress them either. She broke that bottom the deep old way, the oxen leaning into the yoke and the chain coming up singing taut, and the share biting down under the crust into ground that had not been opened since her grandfather was a young man, and the furrow that rolled up behind it was a deep-cut thing, dark and folded and clean, a furrow a tractor's shallow hurry could never have made, because a tractor is built for speed across the top, and weight is a different kind of prayer entirely. Silas Boone walked the chain grave and quiet, watching the hitch, saying less than anyone and missing nothing, and Harlan Vesey came each of those days and stood at the headland with his hands behind his back, and watched, and now and again nodded, one small nod, which from Harlan Vesey was a sermon. The golden hour lay long over all of it, and the dust hung gold and heavy in the still air, and did not settle, and the big beasts went dark with sweat, and the smell of it stood up warm off them, ox sweat and hot dust and turned ground, the oldest smell there is. On the third day, or it may have been the fourth, for she had stopped counting them the way you stop counting the last mile home, the team drove the deep furrow out across the marked square, and the ground changed. It went dark first, a dark that was not shadow, a few feet of it and then more, the color of the earth deepening under the share the way a cheek colors. Then it went damp, the clods turning up cool and holding together, and shining faintly where they broke. Ballast felt it before she did, the way the old slow beasts feel a thing in the ground, and leaned and slowed, and she did not check him. The plowshare turned up cool, wet earth, black and glistening and cold to the reaching hand, and behind the plow the deep furrow did not stay dry. It began to seep. It began, low and patient, and without any drama at all, to fill. The capped spring her grandfather had grieved, the old vein lost in a dry decade, and papered over, and forgotten by everyone but a dead man's pencil, had been found again, not by iron, not by speed, not by a loan against the place, but by weight and depth and patience, by 19 slow beasts finding it exactly where he had written that the slow beasts would. The water rose into the dry bottom clear and cold, and it stood in the furrow denim blue against the cracked ochre of the field, the color of shadow, the color of the cool that had been down there in the dark of the ground all along, waiting the way the dust had waited, only kinder. Odessa Quill did not shout, "Do me the small favor of believing that, because it is the truest thing in the whole account." She stood a moment and looked at the water the way she had looked at the oxen in the sail pen, a long time without saying anything. Then she took out the green notebook and the stub pencil, and she wrote the date, and she knelt and measured and wrote the depth, the way he would have, in a book she had meant to keep only numbers in, and was learning, line by line, was never going to stay only numbers. And she cupped her 2 hands into the seep and lifted a double handful of it, cold and clear and running through her fingers, and she carried it careful up the lane to the house and let it settle bright in an enamel bowl on the kitchen window-sill, where Verna could see it from her chair. And the 2 of them looked at it, and neither said much, because there was not much that needed saying. Over the weeks that followed the spring did the plain patient work that water does. It fed the bottom field, and the bottom field, alone in all that country, came green, a green island in a brown county, a low bright rectangle of living ground you could see from the ridge road a mile off, so that men driving to haul their own water slowed and stared and drove on quiet. The hand-cut stone trough that had stood dry since Amos died ran clear again, and cattle a farm over lifted their heads at the smell of it. And people started coming out to the fence line just to look, the way people come to look at a thing they cannot account for. Among them, one afternoon, a plain white van came up the county road and turned in at the Quill lane, and out of it stepped Renata Sartori, a chef down from the city who had heard the thing that was said to be impossible, and had come to see it with her own 2 hands. She did not gush. She walked the wet green rows slow, and pressed her thumb down into the spring-fed soil, and held it there, feeling the cool of it, and she crouched and cupped the trough water and drank from her hand. And she pulled the first young produce, and tasted it standing right there in the field, and then she asked her questions, a craftsman's questions, quiet and exact, about the water and the depth and the ground, and it was those questions, more than the green or the wet, that told Odessa the land itself was beginning to be proved, and not only the water under it. The county changed the way weather changes, not all at once, but by the day, until one morning you look up and the sky you have known your whole life is a different sky. Royce Tarver's big irrigated ground had gone the color of a paper sack, and the trucks that once hauled his cattle now hauled water, tank after tank up the graded road. And the men who had leaned on the sale yard rail and laughed grew quiet at the store, because a man who is buying water by the load has nothing funny left to say. He drove past the Quill place more than once. The narrator will tell you he slowed each time, and each time drove on, because there is a particular hardness in a proud man that has to soften in its own hours and cannot be hurried. Then on a still golden evening, with the bottom field lying green as a rumour below the brown hill, he did not drive past. He left the truck at the mouth of the lane and came up on foot, which is a thing a man like that does only when he has decided something, and he carried his clean cap, held in both hands down at his belt, the way men once carried them into church and into funerals. Odessa met him at the dry stone trough that ran clear now, and she did not help him, and she did not make it easy, because it was not hers to make easy. He looked a while at the water, then he said it plainly. "I was wrong," he said. That was the whole of it. He did not make a large production out of it, did not explain himself or hedge it or wrap it in the weather, and to his credit he did not ask her for anything, and here I want you to notice something. She did not gloat, and she did not answer him with anything of her own. No, I told you so. No small true cruelty she had every right to. She simply went into the house and brought out the ledger, Amos Quill's clothbound ledger, and she opened it to the map of the bottom field and turned it so he could read the line underlined in a dead man's pencil, and she let the dead man do the answering. The hill remembers where the spring ran. Let the slow beasts find it, a tractor only skates the top. Royce Tarver read it once, and then he read it again slower, and the reading took something out of him and put something else in, and what stood in his face was not shame exactly, but the plain grief of a man measuring all the years he had skated. He put his cap back on. He nodded to her once, the way you nod to a thing you finally see, and he walked back down the lane. And the vindication in it was calm and grief-tinged, and not a fist raised anywhere, because it was never revenge she was after, and it was never triumph the land gave. If you know someone who's been told the thing they love isn't worth much, share this with them tonight. And in the comments, tell me the small, stubborn thing you kept on with anyway, and the town you're watching from. I read every comment, every one. Renata Sartori came back in the plain white van, and she came back to prove the thing the second way, which is the way the world believes, with money. She had tasted it once, now she walked the wet green rows again, and did her sums standing up, and she paid 4 times the commodity price for what the field had already given, and shook on the promise of what it would give. And she asked, quiet and exact, to be first in line come next year, first before anyone, and she meant it the way a craftsman means a handshake. Odessa wrote the figure in the green notebook. She did not make a large production out of that either. She wrote it the way Amos would have written it, as a fact offered for consideration, the number and the date and the depth of the ground it came from, because a price is only a kind of weather too, and the ledger kept the weather, and the land was proved, not the water only, and that was the thing Renata's questions had promised back in the field, and the thing her money now made plain, that patience and wait had turned a dying bottom into ground a careful woman could stake a life on. Verna lived to see it. That is the mercy the narrator has been holding for you. Quietly, since the start, she lived to see the water rise, and the field come back green, and the dry stone trough run clear the way it had run when Amos was young. And she sat at the plain kitchen table, shelling the last of the peas with her small weary hands, and said almost nothing, which was her way, and meant all of it, which was also her way. And then one night, with the field green below the window and the spring running in the dark, Verna Quill died quietly in her own bed, having said her small necessary things and no more, and the narrator will tell you plainly that this was the closest thing to a blessing a body is given in this life, to go out having seen the water come back, in the house you were carried into as a bride, with the ground remembering under you. She left no speech. She left a plain wish, spoken once at the table and never repeated, that the books be kept and the boy be taught, and that was enough, because Odessa had learned by then that the lines that matter are always the short ones. So she kept faith with the pattern. There was a boy who had the hands, Silas Boone, grave and quiet, who had worked harder and said less than anyone through the whole long summer, who could gentle the big lead ox with a flat palm and read a tired team the way some men read weather, and on an ordinary evening Odessa took her own green notebook, the book she had meant to keep only numbers in, and had filled instead with a name and a spring, and a dead man's underlined truth copied out in her own hand, and she pressed it into Silas Boone's hands and closed his fingers over it and did not say much, because you do not say much at a moment like that. Amos's ledger she kept on the shelf above the spring, 3 books now, and the water under all of them. And here, a full turning of the year on from the morning it began, the narrator would have you stand once more where you started. There was an auction somewhere off across the county that morning, the ring dust rising and the auctioneer's chant going fast and bored the way it always goes, and it did not matter to her at all, and that was how you knew the thing had turned. Odessa walked the fence line at the trough in the first golden light, and took her head count the old way, quietly, aloud, the way Amos had. And the 19 were 19 still, fat and slick and heavy-footed, their coats gone deep and shining, their hip bones long since buried under good flesh, and they lifted their broad heads and came to her voice across the wet grass, ballast in the lead the way he was always in the lead, the slow beast the dead man had promised would find the water. The bottom field lay green behind them, and the spring ran clear beneath it, and the county had cracked brown all around a single stubborn island of green, and word had gone out, and quiet men had come to stand at her fence and learn. She stood among the slow beast she had chosen over the iron, in the cool denim blue of the morning shadow, with the smell of turned ground and ox sweat rising warm off the field, and what she felt standing there was not triumph, and it was not vindication, but something quieter and older than either. The plain, grief-tinged peace of having held a line a dead man drew, and having been right in the one way that outlasts being right, which is the water, still running, under everything.